Ethics. I'm Ethical Ella, and tonight we're going to discuss ethics in the media and reporting. We're continually immersed in the media, whether we're online or watching TV. Journalists play a massive role in deciding what news stories get reported and their importance to us, the general public. They have also got a role in keeping people honest and exposing corruption. So, as members of the public, we've got to trust that these journos are doing the right thing by us and behaving in an ethical manner. But tonight, we're going to look at whether they actually get it right. Tonight, we are going to be taking a closer look at the 60 Minutes kidnapping saga and the ethical issues surrounding it. In April, a crew from 60 Minutes were involved in a child retrieval operation that went horribly wrong in Lebanon. It involved Channel 9 engaging the service of a child retrieval agency to retrieve Brisbane mother Sally Faulkner's 2 children who had been unlawfully removed from Australia by her ex-partner Ali Elamine. 60 Minutes were to film Sally Faulkner's story. While attempting to retrieve the children, Sally Faulkner and the 60 Minutes crew were arrested and imprisoned. Mother Sally Faulkner and child recovery agent Adam Whittington were charged with kidnapping, while the 9 News crew were charged with failure to inform authorities of a criminal act. They have since been released and returned to Australia. Sally Faulkner's children, however, remain in Lebanon with their father. Helping to analyse this very messy ethical dilemma tonight, we have our wonderful team of ethical experts. We've got consequentialist Connie, virtuous Veronica, and denatological Donna. They're going to be discussing the ethical consideration on the stakeholders: Tara Brown, the Channel 9 News crew, Sally Faulkner, Ali Elamine, and the children. They're going to have a particular focus on journalist Tara Brown. I'm going to ask consequentialist Connie what she thinks about Tara Brown's actions as a journalist in aiding and abetting the retrieval of Sally Faulkner's kids from her ex-partner in Lebanon. So Connie, how does framing this in a consequential way place the actions of Tara Brown?
Well, Ella, it's been said that journalists have a predisposition towards utilitarianism, which basically means we're looking at achieving the best outcome rather than looking at the means by which we achieve it. The problem, though, is that in chasing news values, we can get confused with the ethical principles. So in this case, could committing a crime, the retrieval of Sally Faulkner's children by kidnapping, be perceived to be of benefit? Consequently, for Sally, absolutely, but the ethical benefit to the general public, knowing that Tara Brown was willing to put herself on the line to achieve justice for this woman, whose kids were illegally taken from her by her ex, is probably negligible. But from an egoism point of view, successfully reported this case for Tara Brown would have been huge for her profile.
How would you interpret this case?
Well, it depends. There's lots of variations on the utilitarian ethical model. So some theorists actually emphasise the long-term consequences of a particular action as opposed to the short-term gains. So in Tara Brown's case, I'm actually not too sure that she actually thought of the long-term consequences before she acted. Particularly because the operation wasn't successful. That was one of the prices she paid for her actions. I mean, I think her response was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to Sally Faulkner's story. I mean, if you had your kids stolen from you and you'd appealed to the Foreign Minister and you hadn't apparently seen any action, you'd be wanting to help. So her actions from a utilitarian point of view could be interpreted as ethical because she was just trying to achieve the best outcome for Sally Faulkner. But on the flip side, you could also say that Tara Brown made an unethical decision where the ex-partner was concerned because obviously taking the kids away from him wasn't to his benefit.
So ethically, Tara Brown was acting out of empathy?
Well, it's a little more complex than that, Ella. There's a philosopher by the name of Bentham who suggested that our human motivation is to actually avoid pain and seek pleasure. So in a nutshell, the action that would have produced the most happiness is the morally obligatory one. So Tara Brown, she saw that Sally Faulkner was in intense emotional pain as a result of her ex-husband, Ali Elamine, taking the kids and cutting off access. So it could be suggested that Tara Brown acted ethically to retrieve them. And it would have taken away her pain and made Sally happy again. So she was, in her actions, was looking at the greater good for Sally Faulkner. But there's another philosopher by the name of Mill who took Bentham's theory a step further and suggested that intellectual and moral sentiments have to come first before there's pursuit of simple pleasure, so that everyone's well-being was of equal value. So Tara Brown wants to right the wrongs of Sally Faulkner's ex-husband, and she wants to contribute to her well-being, but in Mills's terms, the ex-husband is also affected by Tara Brown's actions in a negative way, irrespective of what went before. So the 60 Minutes operation based on his outcome was ethically undesirable because he didn't get the kids back.
So yeah, what about the kids in all of this?
So if the best outcome was to have them reunited with their mother, then Tara Brown and the 60 Minutes team acted ethically. However, if the best outcome was for them to remain with their father, then their actions were of course unethical. This is about being able to look at the consequences of a course of action.
So it's definitely not clear-cut then?
Yeah, absolutely not. Depends on whose philosophy you apply, of course. However, all utilitarianism is based on the single principle that constitutes all moral judgments. So, in other words, the underlying ethos of it's what produces the greatest good. So could you argue that Tara Brown was producing the greatest good? She was certainly trying to apply consequentialism in the altruistic sense for the greatest good for Sally Faulkner. And she was also trying to get the best outcome for Channel 9 in actually breaking the story had it been successful. So someone like my colleague, deontological Donna over here, might say Channel 9 breached its ethical duties by treating Sally Faulkner as a means to an end to win ratings. Would that be right, Donna?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the general public obviously would have empathy for her situation. However, from my viewpoint, the rightness or wrongness of Tara Brown's actions are determined by the overall consequences, which in the end, you've got to admit weren't good. So you could ask, was it right that Sally Faulkner got her kids back? And was it right that Tara Brown told this story? There's another group of scholars by the name of Urmson and Brandt who took things another step further by asking if you could apply the consequences of an action as a general rule. So in other words, would you think it's a great rule that journalists aid parents who lose their kids to ex-spouses in countries not bound by the Hague Convention, and that you would expose these issues? Personally, I'd argue that it's actually necessary to highlight these types of cases and put them in the public eye to raise awareness. I also acknowledge that Tara Brown's actions were in conflict with the idea that everyone should be able to equally exercise their best preference. Tara Brown, by acting for Sally Faulkner, is ignoring the ex-husband's best preference.
So, Veronica, do you think that the 60 Minutes team acted in an ethical and virtuous manner?
Obviously, this is a really complex ethical dilemma. In addressing this dilemma and assessing whether the 60 Minutes team acted virtuously, one needs to ask his or herself if the action is one that a virtuous person would have carried out in the same way. They would look at whether the 60-minute team have acted in accordance to the MEAA Code of Ethics. Have they acted honestly, fairly, independently and respectfully? Virtue ethics looks at the moral character of a person rather than just the actions carried out by them. In this ethical dilemma, virtue ethics requires one to look at the ethical intentions rather than the actions of the 60 Minutes team. However, again, this is very complex. Were the 60 Minutes team committed to helping Sally Faulkner because they actually wanted to help her rescue her children? Or because they wanted to produce a groundbreaking story that would boost their ratings and readership? Or was it a combination of both?
That's a very interesting point, Veronica. I mean, the operation itself would have been quite expensive, so I doubt the 60 Minutes team would have been on board if they weren't given the opportunity to televise everything that went down. What do you think of it?
Well, when Sally Faulkner approached the 60 Minutes team, she would have been aware that 60 Minutes would want to televise the event in exchange for helping her. This isn't the first time that 60 Minutes have agreed to help someone in a desperate situation in order to produce a news story outfit. I mean, at the end of the day, 60 Minutes is a business. They can't afford to be flying people overseas and hiring kidnappers without receiving anything in return. So I think it's fair to say that the 60 Minutes team would have not helped Sally if they weren't able to televise the story. However, was a good story the only motivation for 60 Minutes?
That's an interesting question. I guess for PR reasons, the 60 Minutes team would also argue that their motivation was to help Sally, but who really knows? Veronica, given the sensitivity of Sally Faulkner's story, do you think that the 60 Minutes team should have agreed to help Sally in exchange for being able to record the events leading up to their arrest?
I think Sally's Faulkner is one that deserves to be heard, and it does bring to light some important international issues regarding child custody and women's rights. However, filming the actual kidnapping itself is perhaps a little too much. Not only does it invade the privacy of the families involved, but it also doesn't condone the kidnapping of children, even if it is just to bring them back to their mother.
So you don't believe that the whole kidnapping scheme was ethically correct?
While the 60 Minutes team did have good intentions in wanting to reunite a mother with her children, their actions don't reflect those of a virtuous person.
Okay, thanks for that, Veronica. It was very insightful. Now, I have some questions for denatological Donna. So, Donna, how would you and your fellow denatologists interpret the moral action of 60 Minutes and Sally Faulkner in this case?
Well, Ella, that's a good question, but it's quite broad. There are several theories and philosophers that can be applied to this situation. I'll start by explaining and applying Immanuel Kant's system of ethics, using his famous categorical imperative.
So what is a categorical imperative?
It's essentially the overarching rule that can be applied to any situation. There are 3 different tests that can be applied to see whether or not 60 Minutes passed the categorical imperative. It tells us how to act and describes the structure of reason in our actions. To see if the decision of 60 Minutes passes the categorical imperative, we firstly apply the test of universalizability. Kant wants us to consider our decision as though it was a universal law that everyone would have to follow.
So in this case, with the decision made by 60 Minutes to get involved with Sally Faulkner and her children, would it mean that every media outlet will be required to help mothers in the middle of an international custody dispute?
That's exactly right, Ella. And obviously the decision of 60 Minutes does not pass the test of universalizability, as that would be both impractical and illogical. Next we can look at the test of reversibility. This involves trying to put ourselves in Sally's position and deciding how we would want to be treated if we were her.
If you were in Sally's boat, would you want 60 Minutes to come and help you?
I think it would have been great to have some media coverage on my story in an effort to get public opinion on my side and attract attention of foreign ministers such as Julie Bishop, who may have been able to help in this situation, but I definitely would not expect them to devise and carry out an entire kidnapping scheme so that I could get my kids back.
Okay, that's fair enough. Are there any other tests that we can consider in this scenario?
Yes, the last test is respect for others. Kant said that you must not treat people as a means to an end.
Do you think that 60 Minutes used Sally as a means?
I do. While I'm sure 60 Minutes were keen to help Sally, at the end of the day, they did what they did in order to get a good story, which is a common issue for lots of journalists today. By the same token though, Sally used 60 Minutes as a means to get her kids back.
So the decision made by 60 Minutes failed all 3 of Kant's tests. From this, can we determine that their actions were unethical?
Yes, 60 Minutes acted unethically as the categorical imperative has been violated. They failed to satisfy the test of universalizability, reversibility, and respect.
What about other denatological theories? Are any of them applicable to this case?
Yeah, there's actually theories from W.D. Ross. Ross actually criticises certain deontological perspectives which address certain types of acts, whether they're right or wrong. He believes the consequences must also be taken into account. In this circumstance, Tara Brown should have foreseen the consequences of attempting to take matters completely into their own hands.
That's very true, Donna. The consequences were very serious as well.
Very serious. The possibility of being charged with conspiracy to commit a crime, kidnapping and physical assault. What about the fact these offences carried jail terms of up to 20 years? Or the possibility of Sally Faulkner being denied ever seeing her beautiful children again? The consequences were too extreme. I definitely think there could have been another way around this issue.
So do you think the 60 Minutes were in fact too focused on the children and their well-being?
I agree entirely. However, acting in the right way, involves balancing different obligations coming from different sources of morality.
You mentioned Ross and his theory previously. I'm aware that Ross makes a distinction between the prima facie duties. Are there any prima facie duties here that are relevant?
There's justice, fidelity, which is the truth, non-malfeasance, which is don't harm, and beneficence, which is improving the lives of others. They can all be applied in this circumstance.
Non-malfeasance is certainly an interesting topic in regards to this situation. Do you think the 60 Minutes crew took on the responsibility of all stakeholders safely?
I don't think 60 Minutes and Channel 9 took all the necessary precautions to prevent harm from all the stakeholders. No. A question we could ask is whether 60 Minutes followed the prima facie duty of non-malfeasance, where harm to others should be prevented to the stakeholders at every opportunity. In this case, 60 Minutes had a duty to prevent harm to the children, to the reporting crew, to the men used for the child recovery, the children's grandmother, to Sally Faulkner, or even stakeholders walking around on the street and that witnessed the kidnapping.
The fact that children were involved is very concerning.
It is, Ella. The frightened children were taken from their grandmother and shoved into a car. The footage from the moment the children are snatched also clearly shows the grandmother being shoved when she is also claimed to be hit on the head with a pistol. It should have been Channel 9's duty to ensure at the very least a less traumatising recovery, especially as there are children involved. The snatch in particular could have also easily caused harm to the children and was such a physically and mentally dangerous thing to put them through.
Would you say that 60 Minutes got too focused on the end result of reuniting the mother with their children, and that's why they neglected these duties of care?
I think that could definitely have been a possibility, Ella. Sometimes ethical precautions can be overlooked when the focus is on the end result or even being a hero. It's really important that for the safety of ourselves and others, we take non-malfeasance very seriously, as this can be shown by the 60 Minutes case. The 60 Minutes team were definitely more focused on the duty of beneficence.
Of course. Beneficence is the prima facie duty to improve the lives of others. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Ella.
Because Channel 9 did not perform the duty of non-malfeasance, in a sense, they've completely failed to fulfil the duty of beneficence? Because by reducing harm to others clearly means improving the lives of those people.
It's definitely a complicated and unusual situation. Dr. Jen Garrett explains this as babysitting two children. If you're playing catch with one child, but another is about to walk onto the road, one duty must take priority.
That's an interesting analogy, Donna. How does Ross define the duty of beneficence?
Ross's duty of beneficence is in regards to their health, security, wisdom, moral goodness, or happiness. He says that there are other beings in this world whose position we can make better, and these are the circumstances where this duty should be used. I definitely think that 60 Minutes chose this duty as being priority rather than the duty of non-malfeasance. In regards to the safety of the kids, Channel 9 would have believed that reuniting the children with their mother back in their home country would improve their quality of life.
Thank you, Donna. Now, over the last week, we've invited our Twitter followers to come and ask any questions about this 60 Minutes scandal to tonight's three panellists. We got absolutely flooded with questions. Would the three of you mind answering some of them?
Sure.
Great. So the first one is from Liz Nelson. Don't you think Tara Brown was trying to do the right thing, not only by Sally Faulkner, but her kids?
As I previously mentioned, Tara Brown was obviously trying to help Sally Faulkner and her children, but perhaps this wasn't her only motivation. Had the kidnapping attempt been successful, this story would have been sure to further Tara's career and boost 60-minute ratings.
I think Tara Brown was aiming for the best outcome for everyone, and to me it actually doesn't matter how she got there.
Thank you. So the next question is from Sweeter Without Sugar. What about leaving Adam Whittington behind? Didn't they owe him a duty of care? Was it right?
Of course they owed Adam a duty of care, and they should be fighting to free him from jail. This is perhaps the biggest issue I have with the whole kidnapping saga. This shows a complete lack of care and consideration for anyone outside the 60 Minutes team. The US military have a virtue of leave no one behind. It's a shame that 60 Minutes couldn't adopt a similar virtue when everything went pear-shaped.
It was alleged that Channel 9 actually sent a whopping $680,000 to Lebanon in order to free their own team. And then they left the Whittaker family to have to come up with the funds themselves to free their own son. In order to fulfill the duty of non-malfeasance and the duty of beneficence, Channel 9 should have paid for the release of Adam Whittington as well. It was unethical to leave Adam but free their own stakeholders.
Yeah, I agree. The consequences for Adam Whittington were absolutely appalling. In regards to how he was treated, I believe Tara Brown and Channel 9 were highly unethical in their approach.
Okay, so now next we've got from Ash Mackenzie. Should 60 Minutes be compensating Sally? They didn't deliver on their promise. Now legally she can't visit them in Lebanon.
Ross's duty of justice should be considered here. The 60 Minutes crew were attempting to bring justice to Sally Faulkner in regards to her children being taken from her to another country. However, I believe it was 60 Minutes' duty of justice to foresee the possibility of Sally Faulkner being prevented from ever seeing her children again. Where's the justice in that? Cancer pros should also be considered. Sally should not be compensated as it would violate the categorical imperative. Firstly, compensation in this situation would fail the test of universalisability, as we have to consider whether every journalist who has ever negatively impacted a person should be compensated. In a perfect world, no one would be done over by journalists, but the reality is that every day there are journalists out there that care more about their story than the person that they could be harming. If we were to make compensation for those done over by media organisations a universal law, it would set a precedent for cases that would happen every day, which is too unrealistic and impractical to deal with, especially with the amount of time civil issues take during the court process. Furthermore, for this case specifically, I'm not sure what form of compensation would be suitable for Sally. She doesn't want money, she wants her kids, and 60 Minutes has done everything in their power to help with that. There is nothing further that they can legally do to help her. The test of reversibility also fails. If I was in Sally's position, I wouldn't be expecting compensation for 60 Minutes. Sally was the one who approached them initially, and she knew what would be involved when she decided to go ahead with the plan. She took a risk and it backfired. Her knowledge of the situation takes away her right to receive any compensation. The failure of these tests violate the categorical imperative, indicating compensation would not be appropriate in this situation, as it does not make logical sense.
I agree with Donna. I don't think Sally has any entitlement to compensation from the 60 Minutes team. When she reached out to them, she agreed to their terms. When travelling to Lebanon, she would have been made aware of the risks involved, but she chose to continue with the operation anyway.
Okay. And our final question for tonight is from Megan Bebendorf. If each of you were approached by Sally, what would you have done? Would you have approached the situation differently?
Well, I would have been aiming for the outcome that produced the greatest good in this story. In this case, it would be Sally Faulkner retrieving her children and the general public being educated about the horrors of international child abduction by ex-spouses. Sometimes it's okay for some individuals to be harmed if it produces the best outcome in the case of the ex-partner. We've also got to consider wanting a good outcome for Tara Brown herself and improving her profile and career, perhaps. So,
as a virtuous person, I would have acted in a way that reflects good moral intentions. Of course, I would have wanted to help Sally, but my approach would have been completely different. A virtuous person would have acted within the law rather than contracting a kidnapper to do their dirty work for them.
But if it achieves the best outcome, then it might have been worth it. I don't actually think that Sally and the 60 Minutes team had many other options given the Lebanese legal system.
Of course, she was in a desperate situation. I personally am not aware of any other efforts made by Sally and the 60 Minutes team, but perhaps they would have been better off contacting someone with international power. Perhaps Julie Bishop?
Well, is that really possible? Do you actually think she would have been contactable in the first place? And even if she was, would she have had the time to help Sally?
I mean, probably not. It's a long shot, obviously. But a virtuous person would have exhausted all options within the law rather than reverting to illegal activity.
I agree with you, Veronica. I think that media attention would have been helpful for Sally, just not in the way 60 Minutes carried it out. I think this could have been carried out in a much more ethical way, and that by attempting to try and attack public support to reach people in power, such as the Foreign Minister, could have helped in a better way. It may not have been as big of a story, but it would have been the more ethical decision. The immoral action of 60 Minutes caused huge issues for Channel 9 and worsened the situation for Sally. Hopefully 60 Minutes will learn from this mistake and reconsider their ethics before pursuing their next big story.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all very good. I think she also did try and do a change.org campaign as well to try and get some of that public support going, but obviously she needed a bit more help through a bigger medium than just what she was doing herself.
Yeah,
so I think that's probably what she
very desperate mother.
Yeah,
Shame. Yeah.
Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. A huge thank you to our three amazing panellists who were very insightful. Tune in next week at the same time as we will discuss ethical issues surrounding debates over Queensland abortion laws. See you then.